Okay, beneath the really stupid looking beach towel we have something really cool actually. We have a reissue Gibson GA-5. That looks just like the 50s Gibson GA-5, the Les Paul Jr. amp. There's the front with the TV grill, and there's our control panel on the back with the lovely screen, and just a very well-made amp. There's kind of been a trend, now this one's about 10 years old, but I'm still seeing more and more companies making reissue amplifiers. And my question is, with a lot of these, not all of them, but is the reissue really like having an original or building an original? So I figured we'd pop this apart and take a look. If you go to Gibson's website, you can go to support and pull schematics for the old Les Paul Juniors, which were called model GA-5. The problem is Gibson made a lot of models called the GA-5, and it just depended on what year it was as to what amp you got. So if you look up a Les Paul Jr. GA-5, you would see tube complements like a 6V6 power tube and a 5Y7 tube rectifier, and I think probably a 12AX7 preamp. I'd have to look, but and then they had an unusual 6x9 sort of oval speaker like you'd find in a car. That's pretty rare. That sounds really cool. Sort of like a oddball version of a Fender Champ circuit. You can look at the schematics and determine. Anyway, this is the reissue from around 2005, 6, 7, 8, something like that. So it's about 10 years old. But let's take it apart real quick. Not all the way, of course, but take it apart so we can take a look and see what we actually have and see if this really classifies as a reissue or just a look-alike. Okay, so I've got the back off, and plywood? I think plywood. I can't tell. They've Tolexed it so beautifully I can't see if it's plywood or if it's pine. And that's pretty much the case on all corners. They ran the leatherette Tolex around all the corners. But good wood, rigid, stiff. Screen's cool. You can't put your hand in there and burn your fingers on the tubes. If you've noticed, almost all tube amps produced recently, you cannot reach in and touch the tubes when they're warm. I'm guessing this is a safety thing because they're afraid you're going to sick the lawyers on them. Because you let your kid stick his hand in the back of a tube amp. In the 60s, they probably didn't care. They just let you shock yourself. And let's take a look in there. What do we have? First of all, this is kind of cool. Sorry, I bumped the tripod. This is kind of cool. It's a little box that you can put your power cord back through the hole here and roll it up in there. So it's kind of a neat place to hold it. There are definitely a few updates. Obviously, this is an IEC 3-prong plug. But let's take a look at our tubes. That's a 12AX7. This is a 6BQ5 EL84. That doesn't belong in a Gibson GA-5. Gibson's never used those tubes. And then we have our three-prong grounded cord, which is nicely removable, so it's easy to get to. And our speaker, which is a Gibson Gold Tone. That's an 8-inch speaker, but it's round. It's not a 6x9. It's round. So I have a feeling we're dealing with a very, very different amplifier called a GA-5. But they did, of course, include the original artwork for Les Paul Jr. and the vintage Gibson logo and a control panel that looks a lot like an original. And it says Made in USA on it. I wonder what Gibson was thinking when they made this. Or did Gibson make this at all? Okay, well, the chassis is out. For a nice touch, where the chassis screws into the panel here, there's actually a metal grommet pounded into there, and it uses a machine screw rather than just a wood screw. So it's actually metal into metal. It should hold better. And we have an 8-inch round speaker there. It's a 4-ohm loudspeaker, and the chassis slides in on this little rail there. So it just pushes in real nice, and that works great. And here is our chassis right there. There's the inside guts there. Our power transformers on the bottom, along with our tubes, which are indeed a 6BQ5 or EL84 and a 12AX7. There's our power transformer. That's a Hayboyer transformer made by Hayboyer specifically for this function, I believe. And there is the other output transformer for a single-ended amplifier. The wiring work in this is absolutely a thing of beauty. This is done artistically well. It's absolutely beautiful. But the circuit is not the original GA-5 circuit. Nope, it's not. We have a newer style input jack. We're wired with a little bit different. We obviously used a different type of circuit board, turret board here. This is not necessarily Gibson's original style, but it's really cool. So I decided to do a little bit of recon and see what I could figure out about this. Now the transformer says it's made by Hayboyer, but when you pull the schematic for the reissue of this, the transformers called for on there are Mojotone. Now, does Hayboyer make the transformers for Mojotone? Maybe. But I know Mojotone was contracted to make that speaker. They still sell it. You can buy it on their website. And it specifically says the speaker we designed for the Les Paul Jr. reissue. So, my guess is, at the time, Gibson's amp shop was asleep at the switch, and they asked Mojotone to make the amp for them. That's my guess. I'm not 100% certain. But quite frankly, it's an absolutely beautiful amp. But if you were expecting a reproduction of a vintage GA-5, you're not getting it. There's our 4 diodes, full bridge rectifier, not a 5Y3 rectifier, and definitely not the original tube complement. That doesn't make it a bad amp at all. In fact, it's a very good little amp, and we'll plug it in for the fun of it. But whenever you see the words reissue on something, don't necessarily assume it's like an original. And at the same time, I understand that this design with the diodes and things is probably going to be more reliable than me trying to get one from the 50s and retrofit it and deal with all the old carbon resistors that may or may not have gone out of tolerance, and a speaker that may or may not have a nest of spiders and mice and everything else damaging and destroying it. But if you want a modern reproduction of a vintage amp, you might have to build it, because you can't rely on the manufacturers to do it for you. Anyway, I'll put this back together and we'll take a listen to it. But a really cool amp, and it looks like a Les Paul Jr., looks pretty much like a vintage Les Paul Jr., but certainly isn't the same circuit, and it probably sounds a bit different too. So anyway, despite the fact that even though they called it a reissue, it's a different circuit and a different amplifier, if you just take it for what it is, a American-made, hand-built little amplifier with very, very good construction, you can enjoy it a lot. Thanks for watching. See you next time. I'm going to build something cool, I swear. I got all kinds of weird other projects to show too. I've been working on this stuff for a couple years, but I never bothered to share it.